All right, ladies and gentlemen, Christian Hannah Har here for another roundtable discussion, and we're talking about one of the most incredible films ever made, Point Blank Period, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1974. The reason I wanted to do this is because I got Shudder recently. This is open disclosure. I got Shudder recently. I discovered the Joe Bob Briggs series, and he did a special on this. I know, Tommy, you saw this, and it really completely made me watch the movie in an entirely new way. And I watched it. After watching it, I realized I was like, I have to talk about this movie because I have done an injustice. A lot of horror fans, I think, have done an injustice in not realizing how incredible and how real this movie really comes across, and just the legacy that it has. I think it gets lost in the shuffle, unfortunately, and it kind of takes a second place to Halloween. Not that we're here to knock Halloween, but let's just get in this. Tommy, I'll start with you this time. Texas Chainsaw Massacre. What are your just opening thoughts on the movie?
It transcends horror, in my opinion. I really think that it's just one of the most, the way it's shot. Some of the shots look so the cinematography looks so amazing in some of the shots, and you think about what they were working with, a small budget with a small group of people. I don't know. It blows my mind. But there's so many things, so many amazing things about this movie.
Massacre. What's your initial thoughts?
Such a classic. Just one of my favorite horror movies for sure. I'm so glad we're talking about it.
And you watched it this morning, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One thing I want to get into right off the bat is, one thing I've heard Tobe Hooper say, and I'm not disagreeing with him, but he clearly had intentions of humor in this movie, but and I'm not saying he's wrong by any means, but when I watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre this past time, there's a big difference from the scare tactic in a movie like that and a movie like Halloween. In Halloween, John Carpenter said it best. It's a safe scare because you're watching this movie. It's clearly a movie you're watching, and Michael Myers is a force of evil. He's almost not human. But with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the strange thing about the movie is I don't feel like I'm watching a movie. I legitimately feel like I am watching a documentary, or not necessarily a documentary, home video footage.
Right.
And maybe it's the way the movie's shot with the guy sitting in the van, capturing the hitchhiker in that van with the guys. And I think another big thing, and I want you guys to comment on this, is I don't even want to call it music. I really just want to call it the sounds that Tobe, I believe himself, did. Genuinely just incredible what it does to the atmosphere of the movie. Your thoughts on that, Tommy?
Well, talking about the almost looking like a home video, that's something I thought about watching it the other night. Is the shots are kind of far back a lot of the time, so it's almost like a voyeuristic thing where you're kind of viewing something that's happening. And another thing that makes it seem like that, I think, especially for us, is because if you can't tell by my accent, we from the South, y'all, and we see places like that all the time. We have these kind of rural areas in the woods that look like those places. So we kind of feel like that could happen to us. We could take a wrong turn and end up somewhere, just like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kaylin, your thoughts? Do you see the I don't want to say fundamental difference, but the view difference of a movie like Halloween and a movie like Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, whenever I watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I want it to be grainy. I want it to look a little, like an old VHS tape. Even if I'm watching it on Blu-ray or any kind of new release, I want it to look a little grainy and sound. Like you were saying with the sounds, the opening title with the sound effects that they put in.
Yeah. Yes, at my mind right now, as far as opening a movie, especially a horror movie, that has got to be one of the most surreal and horrifying intros to a movie I have ever seen.
And I just found out from the Joe Bob thing, his showing, that the voiceover, the narrator for that beginning part is John Larroquette, who played Dan Fielding in Night Court, which kind of blew my mind. Yeah, which really blew my mind. But yeah, I agree totally with what you're saying. And I was thinking about there's certain parts where the girl is the main character is screaming, and I feel like if you took just audio of that and played it to somebody, they would think it was from a snuff film or something like that. That's
Absolutely.
That's how hardcore the audio is, and I think the lack of a soundtrack for the most part really does a lot for this film.
Yeah, absolutely. And I keep bringing up Halloween, and I'm not using it as a, to
Well, they're both like the two horror films from the 70s that changed everything.
Absolutely.
Really. You think, well, The Exorcist, but, I mean, as far as like...
Yeah, and what I want to get about with Halloween is the reason I think it's more, I don't want to say more popular, but resonated to a lot of people more was like, speaking of like the intros, now the Halloween theme is one of the most incredible pieces of horror music. I don't think anybody would argue that. And when that music kicks in my mind, especially I take myself back to the first time I watched it, when that music kicked in, I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. When I watched the intro to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it was like, oh my God, what am I about to watch? It was a totally different...
Yeah.
This movie gets you in a mindset of, forget your cinematic scare. We're going to show you a part of the world that could very well possibly be out there,
Right.
and it's not going to meet you halfway like any movie you've ever seen before.
It is loosely based on real life.
Ed Gein.
Ed
And there's a
Gein,
lot of
yeah.
movies based on Ed Gein. Obviously, this movie used heavily the use of Ed Gein's ability to skin people and
Right.
use it as decorations.
He was
and,
crafty.
It was incredible stuff.
You can feel, just going back to, you can feel the humidity in the air in this movie. Like, I watched it the other night when I watched it, it was probably like 50 degrees outside, but it felt like I was in the southern summer humidity just by watching the film. You feel that just from watching it. I mean, they did such a great job with that kind of stuff.
I mean, you think 1963, it's summer in Texas. Probably the most horrific thing of the whole set was the smell.
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely.
and they talked about that. They talked about how horrible it smelled.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And this movie's no different. Every great American horror movie has its drama. One thing I thought was funny, and I think I saw this in a documentary, not necessarily the Joe Bob special, the gentleman who played Franklin, he was definitely an annoying little, what.
Yeah.
What was interesting is he said in the documentary, he goes, Franklin, when I got to that level of being, a pester or whatnot, I couldn't turn it off. So on set, he had to stay as Franklin, and I think Marilyn Burns had said in an interview before, I hated him. We didn't talk to him. We hated him on set.
Yeah.
And the money issues, there was a lot of problems. This movie was basically being done for free at the time. There was no money. The actors weren't getting paid. They were miserably hot. Gunnar Hansen even said that if he would have taken a job at McDonald's during the period of time that movie was made, he would have made more money,
And can you imagine for him with that costume on, how hot it had to be for him in particular?
Oh,
I mean,
Especially in the dinner table scene when they're upstairs in the
Yeah.
attic.
Another great scene in this movie, and probably one of the greatest scenes in horror movie history. They found the Texas Chainsaw Massacre house, so to speak. What's really creepy, and this is another thing, like I said, that Joe Bob makes you think of, is when you get to this house, there's a generator running, which goes to show that these people are living so archaic that there's not a mailman dropping off the electric bill. These
Right.
people are running off of the grid. And this is completely off topic, but I want to get to this. I always thought, and you guys tell me if you thought the same thing, the gas station guy, the older man who's part of the family, I always took him as the dad of the family. But in this, they either the gentleman who played the hitchhiker, I forget his name, but they were all like, it's not necessarily true. It's not disclosed what they are, because clearly this is family in a very loose term.
Yeah.
But he was like, there's a scene at the dinner table where the hitchhiker is yelling at him, is like, "You're just the cook." It's like, he never refers to him as dad. He never refers to him as pops or nothing. So there's so much mystery as to who is what in this family. It's
Right,
clear that
yeah.
he's somewhat in charge. And he actually makes a notion in the film, the cook, that he doesn't like to kill, which I thought was extremely interesting in that movie. The dynamic of his character. But he had no problem beating Marilyn Burns' character with a broomstick the whole entire time. So Gunnar Hansen, there's been a lot of gentlemen that have played Leatherface, and I did a ranking of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, and this was the only time in my YouTube career, whatever you want to call it, that I've done a complete ranking, and the first film took number one. And I want to go on record saying, as far as the gentlemen, all the good gentlemen who played Leatherface, and there was a lot of good ones, Gunnar, I don't think ever was beat. He was able to bring I really don't know what the word is.
It was the perfect balance of Because Leatherface, and I think some of the later movies tried to do that. Leatherface isn't Jason or Michael Myers, who's just silent. He's off in the head. You know what I mean? He's got a little bit of goofiness to him, which when you look at like part 2, they maybe take it a little bit overboard. But it's supposed to be a funnier movie. But Gunnar has the perfect balance between frightening with that little bit of he's off in the head, and I just think he nailed that, and I don't know if anybody else really even came close.
Right. And there's another thing that is just so bizarre about this movie. One of the beginning scenes where they pull up, I don't know if it was the gas station that they pulled up to, or it was a little bit before that, and they're trying to find the cemetery where I think one of them's parents was buried at, and they come across these 2 drunkards, and this guy just lays down, and he's drunk, and he says, "I see things." It just, that guy, he doesn't look like he's part of the Screen Actors Guild. Right. But that performance, and that's what it was, because obviously we know now in 2019 that this was a movie. It wasn't a snuff film. It was nothing. To get these kinds of performances in a movie like that, I don't know that I've ever seen that in another movie.
Well, especially with where most of the people, none of these guys are probably part of SAG back then. This was a pretty independent film, but to get the performances that he got at the level that he did was, it was pretty mind-blowing. Really mind-blowing.
And the hitchhiker, man, that scene, I can remember watching this the other day. That scene where he gets in the van. First off, clearly, nobody picks up hitchhikers anymore. And I maybe this scene did for hitchhiking what Jaws did for the
Could
water.
Be.
But that instance between him and Franklin, just the whole time watching, you kind of got to lean back a little bit, because it's clearly that this guy... Here's another thing I want to bring up. Is that blood on his face? Is that a...
I don't know.
It's so solid.
I've seen people debate
a birthmark.
It kind of looks more like a birthmark, but I've seen people debate it. But that's what I think it's a birthmark myself.
I wanted to bring up with the Franklin character. I was watching, and it's like you can tell he doesn't really want to go along on the trip. He's saying, come on the trip, Franklin. You'll have a good time, Franklin. So he's kind of like, hey, come on this trip. Well, they pick up the hitchhiker, and he gets slashed by the hitchhiker. And then after that, everybody else in the van's like, oh, come on, Franklin, stop being such a crybaby. And I'm like, geez, he didn't even want to go on this trip in the first place.
Oh, man, Franklin. He was... I watched the movie this last time, and I loved Franklin. I've watched it before and been like, oh, I couldn't stand this guy. But I kind of relate to Franklin a little bit. I've always kind of been the outside guy, not part of the in crowd, and Franklin clearly wasn't part of the in crowd. Marilyn Burns, I want to bring her up because this is another thing that this poor woman does not get brought up enough. As far in terms of showing fear, and gosh, when she is in that dinner scene, the terror she was able to show, and maybe it wasn't fake. Maybe they had been there for that long, and that maybe that's what it takes to get a real shocking scene.
And not only that, she was the first final girl that was, because I think Joe Broad talked about this, but it's something I never thought about. They didn't have movies that dealt with like teenagers in early 20s up until Chainsaw. It was all like
more gothic,
adults.
right? And we were coming in like the very tail end of Hammer films, still, weren't we? In the 70s?
But it would always be more adults who were dealing. Even in Night of the Living Dead, it's mostly probably people in their 30s or whatever. But this is the first where you had like, I don't know their ages, but late teens, early 20s, and she was the first final girl. We never had anything. I mean, we see it now, and it's such a common trope that we don't really think about it, but. I mean, yeah, she was the first, and to be able to, she established, and a lot of people talk about Jamie Lee Curtis, but she kind of established that even before Jamie Lee Curtis, what the final girl was,
Yeah.
You have to figure after this movie, she probably had a little PTSD.
Yeah, no doubt, absolutely.
And one of the most incredible things to me, and this is where it's hard for me to see it from Toby's point of view because he has talked about how the dinner scene was supposed to be this funny thing. But when I watch that dinner scene, I just feel like I shouldn't be watching this happening, in the sense that this is not like a movie. And I credit that to a lot of that is the sound that he made in that movie. There's clearly not there's not a goofy score. And the scene with Grandpa, this is where like the movie shows how just messed up this family is in the head. And it's kind of been a trend in the rest of the sequel is that this Texas Chainsaw Massacre family, they will get you, They will torture you, but then when it comes time to like, put their heads together, so to speak, and finish the job, this is where their lack of just knowledge about how to be a family gets the better of them. And they're so worried about getting the grandpa to grab the hammer, which was played by a 19-year-old kid, which was incredible. He might have even been 18.
Well, and just imagine watching this in 1973. I mean, there's nothing like this at the time.
I mean, just the name.
Right.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
Sign me up.
There's never been a movie that had that even remote type of title. No. I mean, you know what I mean? It's incredible.
I mean, you may have had, I'm not sure the year that, you had like the Blood Feast and stuff like that come out, but those were so over the top. But this really, I mean, it's not really over the top if you think about the blood and violence that actually occurs. There's hardly any blood, if any. I don't know, except for, the part where Franklin gets cut.
A lot of it is left to your imagination.
Exactly. And I mean, that's one of the greatest things, because I bet if you would ask anybody after they came out of the theater how bloody was it, they probably would have
thought they saw a blood.
Exactly.
They saw a Loose Limbs movie or something. Kaylin, give me your closing thoughts on where Texas Chainsaw Massacre's place is in history, and do you think it's at a place that it deserves to be, or do you think this film should be even more recognized than it is?
I think it definitely deserves a high spot as far as horror movie greats. It was one of the first for a lot of things. I feel like it really set the tone for that type of movie, and it did it with little to no gore, which is pretty neat. It's one of my favorite movies. I'll watch it over and over again. It's my favorite out of all of them, and I can't say enough good things about it.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We'll close with you last, Tommy, but I want to go next. Okay. This is one of the only movies ever to be banned in a country for as long as it did. I think Joe Bob said that it was banned in Europe until the year 2000. Wow. Think about that. Wow. Think about that. What movie has done that? That really was brought to the public. And that just goes to show, especially now, I urge you guys, if you haven't watched this movie in a long time, go back and watch this. It is not like another horror movie in terms of the way it looks. It genuinely looks like you're on this ride with these people, and this guy who is a part of the crew is just recording everything they're doing in this van. The performances is the most overlooked thing in this movie, and I don't think enough people talk about that, including myself. That's why I'm doing this, to try to bring some more credit to this movie. It's just absolutely a piece of history, and just the whole franchise. I don't want to say it was a genuine decline. There were some really good sequels. There were some not so great sequels, but the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it was so good that, as bizarre of a movie as it is, people still talk about it. Leatherface is in Halloween stores every year. And a movie that just kind of got screwed. I mean, Texas Chainsaw Massacre was getting pulled from everywhere. Nobody made money from it. Toby didn't make any money from it. Nobody wanted to give him money to do the sequel, which reluctantly finally happened, because in the 80s, when everything was getting sequels, finally they had to bring Texas Chainsaw Massacre back. And another thing Joe Bog brought up, and I'll end with this, is the fact that this movie was being put back in theaters in the 80s and still making $6 million a year, which is still incredible. But Tommy, we'll finish with you. Just wrap up Texas Chainsaw Massacre for the people.
I'd say if you hadn't seen it, or you hadn't seen it in a long time, definitely, in today's political climate, where you hear a lot about people who are kind of want to live outside of the system, who are like, we do our thing, but if you come mess with us, we'll probably eat you. And this definitely still resonates today. And also, I could see Alex Jones as part of the family. So, and I also want some barbecue now.
Yeah. So, yeah. That's a movie I'd watch.
Exactly.
Truly one of the greatest horror movies ever. And it kind of gets in the shadow of Halloween. Maybe rightfully so, maybe not rightfully so. I'm going to leave that up for you guys to decide, but this movie will not ever die, and we're going to talk about this in 30 years when I do a second roundtable on this movie, inevitably. But until then, this is Christian Hanna Horror with Kaylin, with Tommy. Go watch the movie.